Um, Welcome everyone. My name is Laisun Keane, owner of Laisun Keane Gallery, based in Boston. I started this gallery last year in April, so I'm quite young. I would call myself a startup or an emerging gallerist. I have been in the gallery business for more than 5 years before this. So I was specializing in ceramic before that, and now I'm actually into doing curating shows that are of different mediums. So ceramic, quilt, fiber, textile, and paintings. So I would love to champion emerging minorities, women, and the overlooked. Um, Today is actually the opening of Vince Palacios' exhibition called Bright. The reason it is named that way is because his works are very brightly colored. And it's, for me, it signifies this, the hope for this year, 2021. We had a horrible year, 2020. So to me, this is us looking forward. We're gonna have a bright future, bright 2021. And Vince is gonna bring that to us, right?
God, I hope.
Let us down, please.
So Vince is started doing ceramics, making ceramic work since 1988. So you've been doing this for a long time. You are very highly educated in the art and ceramics, having graduated with an MFA from Alfred. And then now you are the professor at El Camino College. And so you've been there for quite a number of years. So you have actually produced quite a few star students. Apparently David Hicks is one of them.
I take no credit. Dave is a force on his own. All I did was got out of his way.
Okay. So this panel discussion, we have three of your friends and colleagues and fellow artists, David Hicks, Wedel, and Brittany Mojo. I'm gonna disappear and let Tracy McKenna, a curator from based in Connecticut, moderate this panel. So she will bring her art history background, her curatorial expert to talk to you, all of you, and to lead the panel, and hopefully to provoke some interesting questions out of the audience as well. So Tracy McKenna, you're a curator for many years. Let me read your bio so that people know who you are. You're on Instagram too, right? Everybody please follow her. You are a bi-coastal independent curator with recent shows at Flint Gallery, based in Greenwich, Connecticut, Abel Baker Contemporary in Maine, and Rick Webster Fine Art in Chelsea, New York. You began your career in arts with positions at Washington Project for the Arts, the Phillips Collection, and ICA Boston. And you serve on the board of Franklin Street Works in Stamford, Connecticut. So without wasting any more time, please welcome Tracy, and I now leave the panel in your good hands. All right, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. So I'd like to start actually just welcoming everyone and encouraging you to keep your speakers on mute. If you have questions, we're going to try and pick those up at the end. You can type them into the chat. And I just wanted to start with Vince, if you wanted to talk about the work in Bright that is currently on view. I'm not sure if you have images. There are some pieces that are related behind you.
Yeah, I'm just gonna sort of leave, just for the sake of time, I just put a couple pieces behind me to get a sense of scale and just to see. And of course, I want to encourage you to come look at the show online on artsy.net. But this is a body of work that I've been working with for some time now. This particular exhibition was executed up with Dave Hicks up in his space, up in Visalia. And it's an exploration of these forms that are all about improvisation. They're all about I've been working with clay for so many years, and of course you teach in ceramics, and you teach technique, and you develop technique, and you are exposed to so many different things. I mean, we learn to do so many different things as ceramic artists, and this last couple of years has been a real eye-opener about letting go of some of the techniques as the purpose of the reason of why I'm making, and taking all of those things as I teach my students have them in my tool belt to execute more what it is that I want to communicate as an artist, more poetic notions, more visceral notions. And this work is a real exploration of that. It's a really visceral body of work. It's a love of the material, of the plasticity of clay, the malleability of clay. The things that can be done with ceramics are quite wonderful. And it's an exploration of how far you can push form, what you can do with form and color, but really just more of a poetic. I mean, I'm a musician, and I've communicated several times talking about my work that I mean, we can get intellectual about it, or we can get really didactic and specific. But to me, this is more like Q&A form. It's like recording words or feelings or impressions or ideas or sounds in this material. And it's a record of what I've been thinking, what I've been feeling. It's a wrestling with. It's like making love to and with the material. And I don't mean that in a crass way, but the marks that are left in the work, the shape and the form, the emergence of what results is a sort of a real primitive record keeping of a haptic mark making to record poetry or ideas or thoughts without specific words. So people can see the work and feel something, I hope, or respond in some way, at least hope that it's beautiful. But like the rhythm of a song or the rhythm of a beat of drums, it has a sort of a primal connection with viewers. And that's what I'm trying to get into, that work, that really beautiful, visceral, but very improvisational sort of approach to the work.
Thank you. It's actually a great introduction to a question that I've had in mind, which is the idea of bright being about a brighter future. And for me, that signifies sort of a hope in a positive outcome. And, you know, not that we don't all look for positive outcomes and hope, but with ceramics as the material, there is this huge element of question in terms of how things will come out of a kiln, for example.
Sure.
And so I guess my question is really about what you said about improvisation, and I would love to hear from people about how much they plan their outcome, whether they're sort of like a sketchbook based to how they start a particular project or body of work, or how much of it is veering off into improvisation.
I'd like to know that, Matt, Brittany, Dave, you know, yeah, how improvisational are you in your work, or how architectural or schematic are you about your ideas? That's a great question.
I'll take a stab at it. I try not to be too much of a planner. Most of my work kind of gets started with an idea, and I just roll with it. I found that the more, I guess you could say, architectural or foreshadowing I do with my work, I tend to lose interest. I feel like I become this laborer, and as soon as I have a schematic or an idea in my head, and then I start out with material, I always feel like there's a certain inability, or there's a negativity that floats in my mind when I start to deviate from ideas. Like I've kind of veered off of where I was going. So I always like the idea of just being able to start freely and work. I mean, you work in directions, but not necessarily script it too much. It keeps it interesting for me, makes me want to work, because ultimately in the end, if I'm not excited about the discovery or kind of working my way into a new place, I really just don't want to do it. It is kind of hedonistic. I've been described that way in a number of ways, but I think the studio practice for me has to stay that in order to keep me interested and keep me wanting to discover more and more.
Nice. Matt, how about you? Your work, because of the scale, seems to require a certain level of organization to execute. Is there a sense of improvisation in your work when you work?
Yeah, I think all different degrees for each piece. Like sometimes pieces, there's different levels at which, I don't think improvisation is the right word. I think it's like creating the conceptual space at which kind of like ideas can emerge, like truthful, like ideas of the now, you know, ideas of presence in one's, like, at the time of negotiating material. like allowing conceptual space, contextual space in which one can kind of become, rather than kind of having an outline placed over that, which I think for my work feels like there's inevitably like a feeling of restrictedness, because I think as you begin to interact with an idea, that just inevitably changes and shifts, and ideas think, and you become, you know, different. And so I think for me, it's really important to allow space for kind of like this active, I've been thinking of like active knowing, or like an active process of knowing, where rather than dictating what I'm going to do, creating space in which one kind of becomes and creates an understanding of what one is doing in the act of making. And so I think that's different for me in terms of, and how it comes about. Sometimes that comes about in ideas emerging in the studio, and then like wanting to just decide to do that, make that idea. And then in that case, that idea is a fixed thing, you know, because it presented itself within this conceptual framework. And then I have this kind of eagerness to kind of tackle that. And so like that object then is created. Whereas other times there's like conditions for things to happen. And so I think with scale, like dealing with like basic architectural kind of units that can become many different things, like these plinths and shapes that then I respond to and interact with at the moment. And that happens with the color as well. So I think, wanting space for active knowing, where I'm actively evolving conceptually and emotionally as a maker in the act of doing the thing, you know?
Right. That's a beautiful thought. Active knowing. I like that phrase.
It sounds like you're allowing one gesture or one movement to inform the next, so that they're building on each other, and that your process is responding to what you've done previously.
Trying not to even impose what's done previously as a dogma of making, you know, like everything is under question. And so like each moment, rather than having a system of how I work, which is repetitive or something, like that allowing space for all of those rules to be broken at any moment, I think conceptually allows me room to kind of like constantly become closer to where I need to be as a being, you know, as a person. In, I think, creating some honesty of self that allows myself to become closer, rather than being restricted by my own dogmas of thinking of, you know, yeah.
And yet at the same time, you know, it's such a beautiful thought. And I'd love to get Brittany's take on this, because of sort of the approach that she takes with pattern, which is this repetitive, almost trance-like making of an object over and over, a line drawn over and over, patterns over and over, that it might be a type of dogma, but it's like the pinching, the beating of the heart, the breathing, the blinking of the eyes, those automatic motions that make us living beings. And how we then communicate that into the work. How do we unite that? How does it have confluence with freedom and with being in a moment, or being in the moment? But I love the fact that when Matt, when I see you pinch your work, there's that rhythm, like a heartbeat, that's bringing life in a rhythm and a sort of a stability. And then on top of that, you're building with this fresh idea of free expression or free idea. But yeah, I'd like to hear Brittany's take, because she, I saw you doing the black and white check pattern on that one giant piece for your upcoming show. And I mean, it must have taken hours to do.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I kind of oscillate between planning and intuition constantly. And you know, for me, I'm a really different maker, I think, than a lot of you, in that, you know, my work is about labor in a lot of ways, and so I try to kind of embed it in layers, whether that's through its making, through its decorative elements, etc. But you know, for me, I make spaces. You know, my works aren't autonomous; they aren't these like singular objects. they're constantly kind of evolving. And I make basically what I like to call like a visual vocabulary. And that comes from, you know, endless hours of sketchbook and poetry and reading and drawing, and you know, kind of like mind mapping basically all over my studio. And then, you know, pulling elements from that and kind of remaking those things over and over again until I wind up with a visual vocabulary of objects that then I can go into a space and arrange them in such a way that it becomes really intuitive. It's almost like the material for the art making are the art objects themselves. And so, you know, that's kind of where I'm interested in, like the making and the labor is kind of like the hurdle that I have to get over to get to the gallery, to get to the, or even like, you know, things accumulating in a studio. You know, I love, I'm kind of like a maximalist at heart, and I love seeing things beside themselves, you know, and kind of creating these intimate relationships between inanimate objects that are both bodily but also physical, right? I mean, we make three-dimensional works. We're engaging in physical space, and therefore we're affecting the body in that space. And so that's kind of what I am interested in. So that's kind of like the overarching thing. And in terms of like planning, it's really, you know, about the individual object, but then once I get into the space, it becomes who knows, right? Which gets me in a lot of trouble a lot of times. I have to physically be there for installation, right? Which is not, you know, ideal a lot of the time.
Do you perform well in that space of like for me, having the conceptual space at which I can be most honest is in a private space, is alone, you know, is where I can be fully myself, you know, and I've been trying to work on how do I practice my work in the context of people, you know, around people, and have it be the same kind of, with the same clarity and emotional kind of vulnerability that I can have individually. Like, do you thrive in that kind of,
No.
it's a different kind of, different challenges in like waiting to that moment to, like, how do you negotiate performativity of yourself versus like real strong, like even pushing yourself, you know, like arguing yourself versus performance of self? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that a lot of the reason why my work has kind of developed in the way that it has is because like I'm an educator and I make my work kind of, I mean, I have a studio, but you know, a lot of the time I'm making my work like in the school, in academic space. And so like I kind of have these, again, these like visual tropes, I guess, that I work through that I can do on like small scale while I'm, you know, in between classes, or just to like keep my hands moving, keep my mind kind of on it. So I'm kind of like used to this like performance anyway, I think, just because of the nature of how my how I fire and like the studio spaces that I have like in my pocket, so to speak. But you know, I haven't really, I don't really consider it like this performance. It's kind of like, I don't, you know, it's almost, I try to create things that feel as though they're not, what is that called? Like, not labored over, but worked over in a space. So oftentimes I'll just kind of like unload a box, and like where things land will kind of be how it moves forward. And, you know, and I trust that initial action. It's when I start to like overthink it and start to like over contextualize and over conceptualize the installation itself, I think that's where I run into things that I have to almost start over, like pull everything out of the space and start over.
That's interesting, because I've been thinking a lot about like how, with Vince talked about like the works are a shell of, or a marker or remembrance of something. And I've been thinking a lot about like I've been challenged by the fact that kind of the artwork, the thing, you know, that is so important in art, you know, like is the happening of negotiating art and then like the work, you know, like, so you in that space, like opening a box and the placement of that box, that just like experiential kind of negotiation of mark making, or with Vince's like, you know, with the music going and them spinning, you know, like the speed of thinking and the joy and the richness, just the emotional richness of like experiencing being alive as a creative being, like that for me just trumps everything. Like that's it, you know, as what art is, you know? And so I think so sometimes it's hard to like then contextualize like the burden of things, you know, these byproducts of that, of art.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting shift that I've had recently of thinking about reprioritizing like what the value of art is and like how it functions maybe as a reminder or the memory of this act of being alive. And I think I'm trying to find universals, and it seems like that's one of them, but I'm not.
Matt, that's so interesting because I think of it in the same way. But because I'm a musician, I think of it like music. Whether we're doing it publicly or whether we're doing it in our studios, we are recording something. Something magical is happening in that moment. It could be something great. It could be something mediocre, but we are capturing, recording something, and then we're putting it out there for others to listen to experience and to enjoy. And I think there's something wonderful about, so we have recorded, we've captured in time and in space and material, that poetic moment in your being, and then others get to interpret it, they get to listen to it, they get to respond to it. We don't have a lot of control how they respond to that, but I love to continue to make recordings, continue to make objects that are in that moment, capturing or recording what I'm feeling, what I'm doing, what I'm thinking. And then they sort of have a life on their own, of their own, when they go out into the world, because people spin them and listen to them and see things that I never saw or never even thought of. So I do love the idea of recording in your studio as a musician, then putting it out to the world, and then what happens with it, right? What can you do about that?
There's I mean, clay more than other media, there's, because of the physicality of the medium, there's just this intense emphasis on mark making as a marker of time, so that, you know, every single thing about the making goes into it. And really there's like this sort of duration of the making and of the object, before it exists and then after it comes to fruition. I think, you know, that you could say the same thing about paint, but I think it's a much more visceral feel when it comes to the clay.
Right.
And Brittany touched on something very interesting, which is you mentioned gathering images and keeping a sketchbook and building a visual vocabulary. And I would love to hear the rest of you talk about sort of the personal imagery or iconography in your work, and how much do you draw from a very personal set of images versus, you know, framing it in some sort of larger wellspring of outside influences or art history.
I'll jump in with that. I don't use a lot of imagery these days. My old work was all about imagery. I'm a very didactic person. I'm a communicator, a speaker, a teacher. I was an ordained pastor. I love communicating truths or things that I feel to be true. I love the way Matt talks about truth and authenticity and being in a moment. It's almost like all we have is this very instant, and let's make it as real as possible. So I was using imagery for so long because I want clarity in what it is I'm trying to communicate. But imagery lost its meaning for me because what I'm really trying to communicate is an authenticity that words can't often describe. Music can, poetry can, an act of visceral or physical love can communicate those things. So the work, or my work as of currently, is I use forms that have that a visceral, tangible quality, a touchable quality. I want people to want to touch and to feel the knobs. I want them to feel like breasts, like bump, like bulge, like hip, like shoulder. I want that physical sort of connection because I do want a direct connection to the physical body. And the reason is it's my body pressing up against the body of this material and leaving an impression. I love that Dave talked about hedonism. It's a type of hedonism or narcissism. And I don't advocate for that personally. I'm a fairly monastic person, but I love that narcissistic sense that my impression in this work matters. and it
I don't
communicates.
think it's narcissism or I think it's like, I was thinking about this recently of like, because it's to allow one to explore self,
Right.
the psychological framework of being, like that's yours to explore, right? With the and what it means to be a psychological being and dealing with one's history, and so I think like the exploration of that, even though it is individual, it's also just this untapped like understanding of what it is collectively as a culture, what it is to be conscious, what it is to be like alive, and how do you tap into different sensual and visual, be honest with how you relate to things, like
Right,
deliciousness and the feeling of just chills, like that's an experience. Like what creates that? What creates the sacred? And so like for me to think that we can negotiate and explore those things, it's not a selfish act to be an explorer. You're pushing forward kind of consciousness in a society, right? And I think we can get down on ourselves as that being like a selfish act, but I think it's bigger than that,
No, it's a very good point, Matt. Very good point. Because we bring to art our own, upbringings, our own culture, and so forth. I usually say it. I like to say it more as a joke because really, why do what I have to say? Why does it really matter? So that form of narcissism. But I do want to explore that because I do believe what we have to say matters. And how can I say it in a way that is significant and eloquent and elegant and meaningful to other people? So finding marks or shapes or forms that communicate, for me, more than anything, poetry. I want to communicate moments of poetic truth. I love that you said chills. I want people to feel a sense of power or beauty in the work, maybe humor. I'm getting at some of those primal reactions to shape or to form. The problem is people are so hung up on definition, on what is it and what does it mean? Why is it this shape? And so the intellect or the definition gets in the way of the visceral response to a shape, just primal and beautiful.
Matt, what you were saying kind of makes me think about this Carl Sagan quote that's just kind of like just been floating in my brain for, I don't know, past 6 months or so. And it's, we are all made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to see itself. And, I think so much about just that the physical placemaking of using this material, right? And how we negotiate the material through our bodies and through our physical space, because we live in, again, we live in a physical world. We live in a physical place, and we're conscious that we also have these like meat suits that we're like walking around in and have like the ability to interface with a three-dimensional world in a way that is incredibly powerful. So I think that there's also like that kind of element to it that is kind of outside the individual, right? And is kind of within the collective, I think.
It's kind of a good segue into asking about scale, because you talk about physically manipulating the material, and as you said about the labor, the work is about the labor, and scale I think is really important in terms of how the work is perceived. Looking at something very small that is a vessel versus looking that is vessel shaped, we'll say, versus going really large scale or more sculptural, where it's definitely read very differently and moves into a different category. And I would love to hear your thoughts about that kind of decision and the physicality.
I'd love to hear Dave's take on that, because Dave has a wonderful approach on scale.
Well, I don't know. I was thinking, I was trying to figure out a way to kind of explain my thought on it. But for me, scale is more about a certain comfortability and intimacy I have with material. I feel most comfortable when I'm at a scale where I'm not going to impose myself on the material becomes fragile, or the work becomes so minimalistic as far as its distance to my scale, because I'm a large guy. I always feel like I'm always going to bump into something. I'm always feeling kind of like a, you know, an ogre walking around, and I'm terrified. And so when I work at certain ranges, there's a certain uncomfortableness that happens. And when I start making larger marks and larger forms, I just feel there's a more, I don't know how to describe it, but it's such a personal interaction where I feel comfortable. And I feel comfortable in my mark making. I feel comfortable in the language I use as far as how my body moves, how I move around the work. And maybe, you know, the more I think of it, maybe I am just a hedonist, because it has to feel good. The scale has to feel good. It has to really connect with, you know, these things, these mitts and paws. And so that's one way that I kind of navigate how I choose scale and how I choose to interact. Beyond that, you know, with compositions I make and the way they come together, I don't know. I like work, again, that makes me feel small, because I've always felt out of place. I never fit. I can't fit in an airplane. The car is always too big. My shirts are always have sleeves up to here. That's why you never see me in a long sleeve shirt. They're always rolled up. I just don't fit anywhere. And so I want work that makes me feel like I fit. And that's probably how I work through the world.
How did you, this is specifically for David, since you mentioned that, how did you wind up coming to the arts and to ceramics as a medium originally?
Oh,
It is clearly something you feel a sense of comfort and belonging in.
I've always been a maker of things. Even as a kid, I've built everything. Even as a kid, I wanted to be a seamstress. I wanted to sew. I wanted to cook. I wanted to do all sorts of things that just involved the manipulation of the world. My dad's a carpenter. My mother made everything. My grandma sewed. My grandfather was a musician. It's just kind of in my blood, I guess you would say, of people who interact with the world. I came to clay, you know, just out of my poor academics. And I got thrown into a position in high school, in all honesty, because I was a horrible student and kind of not very focused. And I had a spark, and it was just a, you know, kind of one of those really cheesy, kind of overly saccharine stories where it just like, it clicked, and I've been in it ever since. It's just been an extension of my daily activity in the world that I really love. And maybe again, it's that ability for me to stay doing things, that touch, that kind of tactile engagement. And yeah, it's not really a great story. It's not really an interesting one. It's kind of mundane and boring, but yeah.
Well, there's that initial spark, and you just don't, none of us know when something is going to hit where suddenly it feels right. It feels like this is the right thing, the comfortable thing, even though it might be a challenging thing, that is it for us. And it happened to you in high school. Vince, obviously a little bit later. You mentioned being a pastor first. I would love to hear from Matt and Brittany how they wound up working their way into this.
Yeah, my dad's a potter, and so I think I grew up around the functional vessel. So he's a folk potter in a small town. And so I think for me that developed the kind of reference point of what I understood art making was through his studio, you know, and decided to go to art school, wanted to get rid of pottery, you know, at his recommendation too. You're like, do not do this. This is like labor. I do not want to see you suffer. But then, so like in this intention of like letting go of that past, going to art school, I really quickly didn't have a context to begin from because I had let go of this thing that was just deeply me, you know, that I was rooted in conceptually. And so I think it took me a few years to go back and realize that that was the place that I had to begin from. And so I kind of went back from sculpture to ceramics in the context of sculpture. And that just became kind of this way of thinking and has evolved into a much bigger conceptual practice in terms of why I use clay and interact with it as a material. But a lot of it's rooted in my dad's kind of the kind of there's a humbleness to working with pottery, you know, of like, it's not that expensive, you know, it's care over a thing, you know, a small thing that then is used. So like the functionality of art, you know, it functioning actively within a society, like rather than theoretically in the context of like a gallery space or museum, like that has always been this kind of like grounding kind of point of reference at which kind of guides how my practice plays out, I guess. Yeah.
Brittany?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was purely accidental. I was in undergrad at Cal State Long Beach, and on the art track, had no real clue what that looked like, never really knew an artist, like, to be honest, and didn't know really that you could be an artist, that was a thing that you could do. And I think that the gift that Cal State Long Beach gave me was just the immense array of professional artists that were teaching me. And, you know, I think I was kind of on like a sculpture path for a while. I was like, it took me a long time to graduate from undergrad. I think it was like almost 7 years. And, you know, I had to take ceramics as part of my, you know, I was like, you have to do this. So I took a class, and I think it was with Kristen Morgan. Maybe.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is me. So I kind of became immediately obsessed, and the rest is history. Yeah.
Brittany, that's great. It's so funny. You know, I was 27 when I came to ceramics, and I had no interest. I was a manager of a decorating store. I was miserable. My wife and I had decided we're going to sell everything we own except my 67 split windshield Volkswagen van. We sold everything we own, and we we're going to go live in Europe and backpack. And she had been asking me to take ceramics for years. And I said, why? I don't want to do ceramics. And I thought, well, you know what? I love her. So all I have to do is take this class for a few weeks because we're leaving to Europe. And I took the class at Golden West College. And I'm telling you, the first night of class, it was like a kick in the teeth. I said, I'm going to do this the rest of my life. I'm going to go to Alfred and get I didn't know what Alfred was yet, but the teacher was talking about it. And I thought, yeah, I'm going to go there. And we went to Europe. We cut our trip short, came back, and I went straight into Long Beach State at 27 and had the same experience you had with Tony Marsh and Jacob Oppel and some other folks that were teaching. It was just an amazing, transformative moment. But coming to it late in life was really good for me.
Yeah. You know, I think it's interesting too, because I was initially really reticent to take a ceramics class because my whole grasp of what ceramics was
Right.
like, my reference point was like Target, you know, like the very like basic mug, or
Right.
and like this is kind of, you know, I was in school kind of when critical craft and that kind of school of thought started to bubble up and emerge. And you know, this is when like craft was like really a big NO, right? This is kind of before the big California, like, or I would say the more recent California ceramics boom. And, you know, so I was really like, I didn't want to take it. I thought it was like for other people, right? And so, you know, just my ignorance really around the material and what I thought it was. And it's really a shame. And I try now as an educator to try to, you know, address that quite a bit. So at least there's that.
I think that the commonality of clay as a medium that, you know, you mentioned Target, and Matt talked about his father being a potter, you know, because people have intimate and early experiences with either the byproducts or with making in elementary school. I think that people have a real sense of joy about ceramics. And I'm just looking at the backgrounds of your studios and the work, and there's obviously a lot of color involved, and color also can bring a lot of joy. And I'd love for you to just talk a little bit about your choices on glazes and finishes and color, and whether you work through particular series in shades or whether you're really mixing it up.
I've been trying to figure out like why I've been trying to figure out why I am so viscerally just in have such a visceral experience to color. Like when I make big bats of blue, you know, blue stain or slip or something, and just seeing that much pigment, you know, I mean, holding it in your hands, you know, there's just this, and even like smearing it, you know, or just doing that feeling is just, there's just this feeling of being really alive and this excitement. And I've been trying to figure out like what the phenomena of that interaction comes from. And I think, I don't know if how much this is, but I mean, we're surrounded in a visual world of color, right? And whenever we see it separate from the visual world, it's almost as if you like took a pixel out of something and just pulled that yellow out, you know, of your kind of consciousness, your visual consciousness, you know, and then started sculpting it with it, you know. So it's almost this psychologically, it's this interesting act of like sculpting with the phenomena of vision, you know, phenomena of the visual. And I think that just gives this kind of like, I think as an individual, it gives you these just sense of questioning, challenging perception, challenging how color functions, the objectness of color. I mean, there's just so many like delicious things. I was working on this big slip sculpture last night, and I was like, I was needing my space to be alone, you know, because I was serious art, you know, time. And I got halfway through it and I was just, this is so fun, you know, like, oh my God, this is just what it means. This is what it means to be alive right now. So I called my daughter in and I was like, you have to play with this material, you know, and we were just both working and just experiencing. And like, that was just so powerful yeah, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but.
Oh, but that's great, Matt. The thing about color in ceramics, though, is that quite often we don't, Tracy, we don't get to see it in the moment. So, gosh, it truly, there's an act of faith, there's an act of stumbling in darkness, working in blindness, believing that these things that we're working with, knowing that it's supposed to be red or green or blue, the interaction, the confluence with the heat in the kiln, hoping those two things come together. To me, color is an act of faith. First of all, I'm colorblind, so I don't see color very well. And I'm an absolute excessive person. I remember somebody asked, I think Tony Marsh is here on, somebody asked Tony a question about me. They said, does he move towards simplicity or towards complexity? And the answer is complexity. Always. More is always more. I want color, I want volume, I want flavor, I want spice, I want all of that. For me, color is an exuberant expression of idea, of passion. I don't know if that's cultural, you know, of course, coming from a partial Hispanic background, the music and the color and the flavor, is that imprint on us when we're young? But I just know that I love the exuberance of color. I love what John Gill said about color. I wish I could remember his exact quote because he's ridiculous about color. He said,
all work together, but some have to work harder.
That's right. I love that. I think there's no rules. I follow no color rules. I follow no color theory. I don't even have a plan. I have buckets of color and I just get crazy and start grabbing and applying. And I'm telling you, something happens over time, a confidence and an intuitiveness that just simply works. And sometimes I make it work by sheer will. And other times it's just this harmonic convergence that comes together. And it's like, I didn't mean those colors to do what they did, but they did it. I love that color has that kind of a life on its own. And when you don't restrain it, when you don't put too many rules on it, when you let it be free, I think you wind up with some really wonderful stuff, but you also wind up with your foot in the mouth a lot of times as well, because it just doesn't work at all. Well, I love that risk.
Like you said, that it's an act of faith, you know, that sort of circles back to that idea that there's a hope in the outcome. that you kind of have to, you work towards something, but there is this huge element of chance and surprise in how you all work.
Right.
I think there's hope, but then there's also this allowance of, or an act of letting go of the thing, you know, in order to allow it. And I think that's like a byproduct of the trauma of things blowing up, is like you can, as you let, I've been thinking about how material creates certain contexts of thinking, you know, so like engaging in a painting practice. I mean, that's a generalization because there's different aspects of painting, what that is, but like that as an act creates a certain kind of conceptual lens in which one negotiates art history, cultural history, whatever, the act of making. Working with glass, it's a different thing, metal and ceramics. And so I think it's interesting the different kind of lenses that open up in the act of making within clay, as like that as a viewpoint on the human condition, the human thought process, how one puts so much effort into things that can just blow up, and their fragility, their strength, you know, they last forever, but they're so fragile. There's so many like lessons of like a microcosm lessons of just life and death and fear and hesitance, and how those are manifest in kind of in the objects that you interact with and end up engaging. So I think for me, ceramics in general becomes this just microcosm of like, of teaching tools of understanding what it is to be alive and how to become a better person, I guess.
How to endure as well, how to endure through difficult situations.
And do it anyways. Yeah. Yeah.
Color for me is like a grizzly bear attack. It scares the shit out of me, but I'm still interested. I have really terrible color anxiety. You wouldn't guess it by looking at my work, but when I'm putting color on something, it's just, I'll look at a piece for weeks and be terrified to lay color on it. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's part of that kind of initial understanding of what ceramic is, you know, this punctuation that was always kind of ingrained of once you fire, it's done. Even though I know that's not the case, it's not even my practice, but I have this kind of residual terror of screwing something up. And I screw them up all the time. And I think it's probably the act of kind of trying to correct my mistakes that, or the things that in kind of post-production, I find the most interesting. But during it, there's a million other things I'd rather do. Not because I don't like it, but I'm just scared. I don't know what it is. Even after all these years, I still get terrified when I see that glaze and I know what's going on there. It just
right.
freezes me.
Is that why you kind of like some of your pieces are accumulation of a lot of small single pieces? Does that allow you the flexibility to kind of deal with that fear of ruining a thing? Because like you can just amass all of these units that then you can compose, rather than putting all your eggs on like firing and like there's probably a different relationship to the objects when you're firing single pieces versus those.
Yeah, I think that's like a perfect way to look at it, because you know, with all these little individual interactions of multiples, they become these kind of pixels for me, of bits of color that I can then compose after the fact. So I can choose, I can look for the successes. Lately with the newer work, I'm having to become much more committed to my glaze interaction, because you know, refiring a large object over and over again is just no bueno. It just doesn't react well. So it's having, you know, with that, I'm having to confront my my fears. It's been a good exercise, but still, I hope someday I'll get over it. The fear.
You know, I'd love to hear Brittany's take, because Brittany, you use such minimal color. You use color in a very powerful fashion, but you use what? You use black, you use white, you use blue. What other colors do you use?
That's about it. I mean, I don't know. I think about color. I love color, first of all. It's I think we all do, right? It's definitely seductive in a lot of ways.
Right.
So, you know, I'm always trying to avoid like a gimmick, I guess, in the work. And it's funny because I'm starting to think about this in terms of like the check making right now. It's starting to feel kind of gimmicky for me. But anyway, that's a different conversation. But for me, you know, I look at color as, or I use color that's intrinsic to the material that I'm using. So I choose materials because of, and by materials, I mean bodies of clay, because of the color that they are. And so, you know, for me, when I you know, I tint porcelain, I use tinted porcelain and apply that to a pot. I will, you know, mix various, you know, mason stains into, you know, again, porcelains and things like that, and use color in that way. So it's like more of like this physical, again, like this physical application of color. And, you know, and through that, I'm always so worried about like things feeling contrived or something. I've always kind of had this ever since even I can remember feeling this way in undergrad. I was really hesitant to use color because I was so, you know, worried about things feeling too finished or something. And so again, and I think it's because my work isn't autonomous, right? The individual objects are not supposed to be kind of existing in space alone. So, you know, I think because of that, I have to kind of, again, like use a vocabulary of materials that can be easily interchanged and interwoven. And, you know, I almost kind of think about, you know, applying those materials to objects as being kind of like fabric or textile or something like that, where the pot kind of is the body and I should say the object is the body, and the decorative elements, the color, is the presence of a different material, which then just emphasizes the material of which that object is itself. And so that's kind of where and I don't really know if that really answers the question, right? You know, I'm interested in intrinsic color because I'm interested in a platonic object, in an object that just kind of comes out of something, that is like again, like kind of a standardized, a ready-made, right? So like I like to think of my work as me as being this kind of like producer of ready-mades, that then I can kind of pull from and use to put into an installation. And then I know that language isn't quite correct, but
like, what is the production of ready-mades though? Like, what happens in the production of those things?
Well, you know, I think it's
conceptually or intellectually as a person, as an artist. Like you talk about the production of ready-mades, and then they become something else. But like, there's something that's happening in the production of them, right? That.
Yeah, you know, I think it's, for me, it allows me not to stop, allows me not to slow down. I think that I'm definitely not one of those people that, you know, will think through an idea fully and then sit down and make that idea. I like to make things, get them out into the world, and then reflect. And so if I can do that, if I can allow myself the space to make a lot of things, and, you know, of course, there's a lot of failure in this. There's a lot of letting go in that kind of way of making, a lot of reclaiming clay and reclaiming objects. But, you know, I think that it allows me just to keep going, and not feel so burdened. And, you know what, this could be really I'm fresh out of grad school, really, compared to all of you. So, you know, I think that could also just be like a byproduct of like just 100% like pushing away that like that constant like, what does this mean, what does this mean, what does this mean, right? And so for me, I had to find a way to get out of that mode of thinking, and that just meant like having to make through the things. And so I needed to figure out a way to do that, that wasn't encumbered by all of this other layer of things like color, you know. And so I just kind of landed on intrinsic color as being kind of the way that I would deal with it. And it's kind of stuck. I mean, I'm going into my 5th year out of grad school. So I'm almost on the cusp of being healed from that trauma, you know, but, you know, I'm not quite there, I don't think.
But
It's
the
sort of,
5
it's
years-
sort of trite to say, but it's like becoming true to yourself. Each of us, come on, each studio practice, each approach is unique and different. Like when I go to the smorgasbord, I put everything on the plate. That's why I'm diabetic. When I go to the ice cream store, I want every topping on my sundae. I want every flavor, every syrup, and others are more selective and more wise about it. The point is you be true to yourself. How is it that you approach things, man? If you're just give me a couple jujubes and a jelly bean and some sprinkles, give it all to me. I want to pile it all on until I'm sick. But we want to be true to our personalities, to our approaches. And I think what's so wonderful is to see that uniqueness, how each of us approaches this. There's no right answer to that, obviously, right? The truest work is the work that's true to the person.
Do you feel like, Vince, that you practice restraint in your work?
There is restraint, but not with color.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I think we all practice restraint on some level. We all have limitations. Well, come on, I'm lazy. There are things that I don't want to do, things that I don't know how to do. I try to keep all that at bay, and I try to grab hold of the things like a kid that are right in front of me, the bowl of ice cream and all of the toppings. And I try not to think about the limitations. And I take those moments and I just revel in those moments. And then I try to incorporate new things into that. But yeah, there's definitely limitations. There is restraint on some level, because I also know, come on, I've taught ceramics for years. I taught glaze calculation for years. I know how to create success and how to create failure. The hard part is trying to forget about all of that stuff so that you're not enslaved to this process or to this knowledge. I remember when I taught glaze calc, the best work of my students were always from non-ceramic majors who knew nothing about the materials and had no expectations. They merely reacted to the materials because they liked the way that they sounded. They had no knowledge of them.
And the ones that didn't take notes,
No notes, they don't know what they're doing, and they produce the best surfaces every time.
That's an interesting condition at which that information comes about,
Right.
because it's in the limitations of certain conceptual approaches to making an art that restrain that uncovering that can take place of
Right.
like phenomenal, if
Right.
you can kind of step out of the way of your work and let that internal voice, I think I guide you in a way. And I was kind of curious about, this changes the subject a little bit, but I didn't know, like, for you with a spiritual, like a long spiritual practice, and like kind of the internal voice that occupies that practice, like, do you see a connection? Is that the same voice that occupies the practice of your work as an artist? Or do you see a connection there?
Absolutely, I do, simply because, and I think that's true of each of us, however we live our lives or believe. I mean, the way I live my life, the way I believe, the way I feel, the way I trust, those elements are what my art is, simply an extension of myself. And the purer I am to myself into what I really believe to be true, I think that the artwork is expressed in that purer sense. So there's an element of faith, of trust, of I believe in those deep spiritual connections, not just the physical world. I love the physical world, but I believe there's something beyond that. So the work sort of connects or unites with that metaphysical aspect of existence, that non-physical, the conceptual, the spiritual, the poetic, the visceral. And I believe in all of those things. So I try to be, Matt, like what you're talking about. I want to be in that moment when I'm making, so that all of that stuff is going into the work. Now, whether I'm successful or not, that's a hard one to say, but I try to be in.
It's like that's arbitrary. It's like, it seems like it's not up to point, the idea of the success or the kind of, like,
It's the
that's
faith
almost, it's secondary to that other work that you're talking about.
Right. And yet it's a real thing that we discuss, because we're artists in the world and we're connecting with other artists. We're doing shows, selling work, exhibiting work. Those are important elements of this. And so the weight of what's successful, I want all of that. I want all of those things to work together. I don't want to be a monk potter on a mountaintop, because I'm not a art brute guy just making work that no one will ever see. There is that element of me that wants the work to be seen as well. And I want to communicate to other folks. We'll all look at the chat box for questions.
I've just been thinking, you talk about music, we can get questions if they write them, but like you were talking about music and why, for me, music is like the most palatable, visceral thing. And also like movies of artists making work, you know, like you see them making and like, you're like, whoa, you're like, that's what it is. That's the truth in there, you know? And so I think there's a difference in the object, the result, and the phenomena of making, you know, there's a different thing. And I think with music, the phenomena of making is recorded, you know, that the act of making is the record, you know, whereas with sculpture or with painting or other object-based practices, that we're kind of left with the result of that then becomes a point of interaction for the viewer, you know, then the active thinking, you know, I hopefully then, you know, that becomes the point at which they engage conceptually the work, and hopefully the memory of that like active making, you know, is the value of like these objects.
Right, it becomes the souvenir. It's like I want to be a Harry Potter geek, but a port key, it becomes a connecting point to take that viewer where I was. So I'm in a place and I want other people to be in that place, but they can't really. So I make work, and then when they interact with that work, when they see the work, when they touch the work, maybe it, like a port key, it takes them to that place as well in some way by touching the work, seeing the work. They go to that place on some level, like music. It takes you to a place where the artist was when they created. So it is a wonderful souvenir.
Great. So we have a question actually from Laisun asking about our hopes for this coming year and in the direction your art is going. Anyone?
Brittany, jump in. You got a great show coming up, don't you? What do you hope for your art in this coming year?
Oh man, I just want to be able to, I don't know, to
Make work.
make work and be in other people's studios and connect again through art. You know, I want to be able to not be afraid to see people, which, you know, is a huge part, I think, of art making. And yeah, that would be my hope.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to take some risks this year. I've got a couple of things in my head that need to come out that are going to be a little unconventional for me. Not wildly, but I'm interested in going in a couple of directions that are going to be new. I'm kind of hoping for a little bit of a rebound from this last kind of push with the show that's up, and kind of recouping my energy and getting that ball rolling. I think it's going to be a great year for everybody.
You had your show open today, right?
Yeah, my show opened today at Diane Rosenstein Gallery in Los Angeles.
Woohoo!
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great. So I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm just gonna thank everyone for participating and turn it back to Laisun.
Oh, there is a question there. If working with color is very much in the moment for you, why not a more immediate discipline like painting or drawing? Why the laborious process of clay to explore your ideas? How does the three-dimensional give meaning to your ideas? Good heavens, I've wrestled with that for so long. Something about the ceramic material in particular, the visceral, the plasticity, the physical interaction. I get to, it's like I want to be with the material. I'm touching the material, I'm surrounding it, it's surrounding me. And even more so, as a storyteller, a painting is a wonderful story, but it's left to right, top to bottom. There's no dimensionality. I'm not saying this in a critical way about painting. I love painting, but I want to move around a form, and I want to tell a story whether it be with words or images or ideas or marks or color. And then as I begin to move around, I forget where I am and I forgot where I started. And as I keep moving, it becomes a continuous circling of an idea. So they never really stop. You just keep moving continually in this sort of circular direction. I love that notion of that idea, because with a painting, to me, it is intimidating because you do have to have a clear idea or story that you're putting from beginning to end. But as you move around a work of sculpture, you see multiple facets. It's like cubism. It's like different moments of time. And as you're working, that's what's happening. You can't sculpt a painting. I mean, I suppose you could, but to take like I throw a straight cylinder and I can't stop there. I want to push and push and push and push, add and subtract and stretch to see where it's going to go. I'm looking for something. I'm desperately grasping to find in a material something that visually says, here I am. And I don't deny painting as a possibility in the future, but for me, I don't get that same sense with painting because there isn't as much of a physical, visceral interaction that transforms the material physically in space the way that ceramics does. So it's like painting in 3 dimensions, I suppose.
Great.
Yeah, someone said it's like a form of meditation. Definitely. It's very meditative.
All right, do we have any more questions? Well, I think Elizabeth also mentioned that the act of making reminds her of what she has heard about how Pollock had discussed his splatter and drop paintings.
Right.
In yeah. Do you guys all resonate with that comment about drip painting, splatter, using your glaze when you glazing?
I think, I mean, if each of us definitely approaches that differently, I certainly resonate with that. I love, listen, I've got a lot of kids, right? 2 of my kids, one of my sons would just scribble on paper and it was unbelievable. It was pure art, pure phenomena. Something about his intuitive approach to scribbling created these beautiful compositions. My other son, when he scribbled on paper, it was scribbling and it didn't look like anything. There was something intuitive about the body motion in one case and not in the other. And I feel like I see that in work. Some artists that are more random, like Pollock, just letting gravity play its role, letting density, letting viscosity. I love all of those. But there is an orchestration. There's a way of orchestrating those elements without getting in the way of gravity and viscosity and chance. I do love that element in my work, and many times it does work, and it seems like nonsense or just like scribbling, but there is a body dance or motion that creates beauty, and I don't think we can put words or explain how or why that is, but I'm always looking for that kind of poetic body motion in the work, whether it's pressing the clay or dropping or dripping or adding glaze. And you do it long enough and you develop this trust. I think Matt said it, you're talking about not letting limitations, hesitations get in the way. Because he who hesitates, she who hesitates screws it up. Don't hesitate, let that flow. And I think something deeper is trying to be communicated through that seeming random process. I don't think it's as random as it seems.
Unless if you want your work to be about hesitation.
Well, there you go. So there are no rules, right? That's true. Hesitancy is wonderful at times. That's really good, Matt.
All right, guys, I think our time is up. So I appreciate everyone's contribution and also spending an hour, more than an hour with us here. Thank you, David. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Tracy, for moderating this panel. Thank you, Vince. So as a reminder, Vince has an online exhibition with my gallery. It's on my website as well as artsy.net. So it's an amazing body of work that you're showing. I wish that we could have a physical show. It's just that, you know, right now the COVID is stopping us from doing a lot of things. But, you know, I think that our online purchase and viewing art is actually in the future too. So I also believe in that. So let's be hopeful and believe that the future is bright.
Right. Thank you for coming, everyone.
Thank you so much. I appreciate all of your time.